Section 6 of Chapter 5, we're doing some more with factoring and dividing, and we're finding rational zeros still. And remember, in the last section, I gave you one of the zeros, and from there you can divide that out and then factor completely. But if I don't start you out with one of the zeros, you've got to figure it out on your own, and sometimes there's a lot of numbers to choose from. So I have a formula that will help to narrow the search down just a little bit. It'll still be kind of tedious, but you can do this. So all possible zeros can be found, or at least anything that could possibly be one of the zeros can be found by taking the factors of the constant terms and putting them over the factor of a leading coefficient. So if you take all of the factors of the constant term and list them out, and then one by one put them over the factors of the leading coefficient, then that will give you a list of all of the possible zeros. Let's do one so you know what I'm talking about. All right, so I've got this function, x cubed plus 2x squared minus 3x minus 6. So that's my function, and I want to know what are all the possible zeros. Well, what I'm going to do is first I'm going to factor the constant term. The constant term is 6, and all the factors of 6 are, if you'll remember doing it this way, 1 times 6 is 6, and 2 times 3 is 6. So those are all of the factors of 6. Now remember, you can also have a positive 1 or a negative 1, a positive 2 or a negative 2, a positive 3 or a negative 3. You get what I'm saying? Okay, so there's more options. The factor of the leading coefficient, in this case, the leading coefficient is just 1. So that's going to make our life a lot easier. So we're going to put the factors of the constant term, 1, over the factors of the, and in this case there's just one of them. So we're just going to put 1 over 1. And then that's a plus or minus. We're going to put 2 over 1, either plus or minus. We're going to put 3 over 1, plus or minus. And we can put 6 over 1, plus or minus. So when we simplify these down, all of our possible zeros in this case are plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 3, and plus or minus 6. So these are all the possibilities. So once you've got those, then you've got a smaller number to choose from. All right, let's do one that's a little bit more difficult, because we've got 2x cubed plus 7x squared minus 4x plus 8. So first we want to know what are the factors of our constant term. So the factors of 8 are 1 times 8 and 2 times 4, and that's it. The factors of our leading coefficient are 1 times 2. So we actually do have some factors here to divide by. So let's set them up. We can have, what I would do is I would start by putting them all over 1, and then put all of these factors over 2, because you've got to have the combination, you've got to have all of the combinations to get all of the possibilities. All right, so we're going to have 1 over 1. And in the book, it puts this plus or minus in front of each one. What I would do while you're working, I would just put 1 plus or minus, and then remember, and then on your final answer, you're going to need to have that on every answer. But while you're working, just know it's just cumbersome to put it on every single one. So plus or minus, you've got 1 over 1, you've got 2 over 1, you've got 4 over 1, and you've got 8 over 1. Then you've got 1 over 2, you've got 2 over 2, 4 over 2, and 8 over 2. Did you see where I got those numbers? So I started out and I took all 4 of the factors of 8 and I put them over 1. And then I took all 4 factors of 8 and I put them over 2. So now I have all of the combinations. So now when we simplify, we've got plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 4, plus or minus 8, plus or minus 1/2. And then if you look, 2 over 2 is 1. We already have plus or minus 1. So that's the same as this one. So don't write them twice. All right, don't give yourself more work. 4 divided by 2 is 2. We already have plus or minus 2. And 8 divided by 2 is 4. We already have plus or minus 4. So here is our list of possible zeros. All right, so once you've got your possible zeros, so this was much easier when I just gave you one, wasn't it? Once you've got your possible zeros, now you've got to plug them in and you've got to verify those possible zeros using synthetic division. You can use long division if you want, but I would suggest synthetic division. So let's do one here that way. So we've got, oh yay, we have a leading coefficient of 1. So that's going to narrow our possibilities down tremendously. So we'll start out by, and why don't you go ahead and shut off the video and do it real quick. First, find all of your possible zeros. Find all the possible ones and then come back to me and we'll divide it out. Did you do it? All right. So you're going to start out with the factors of 14. The factors of 14 are 1 and 14, 2 and 7. Oh, and that's it. That's not too bad. So your possible, and because they're all over 1, your possible zeros are plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 7, or plus or minus 14. So just because the smaller numbers are easier to divide by, I would start off testing, and this is really a trial and error, and this is why I'm splitting this section up into 2 sections also. It's not hard, but it is tedious, and you've got to try, you got to keep trying, and some of you will get lucky and you'll guess it on the first one, and others will have to try 3 or 4 before you find the right one. Sorry, that's just the name of the game. That's the way it goes. So let's start trying some. So we'll plug in 1, -8, 5, 14, and I would start one. Smaller numbers are easier, so I start with 1. And so use synthetic division and bump it down. 1 times 1 is 1, -8, -6, -6, -1, negative times -1, and that does not equal 0. So 1 is not one of your zeros. All right, so you've ruled 1 out. Now let's try -1. We tried positive 1, let's try -1. So what do we have? 1, -8, 5, and 14. And we're going to divide that by a -1. Try a -1 as a 0. Let's try it. Bring down 1. That would be -8. That's not what we want. I looked up ahead instead of looking at what we're doing. -1 times 1 is a -1. -8, 9. Times negative times a negative is a positive 9. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 times -1, ha 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 ha, is a -14. So we do have one of our zeros is a -1. So one of our factors is x plus 1. And then we have, this is our x squared minus x plus 14. So now we can look, we can either continue to divide this by some of these. Now remember, these are only the rational solutions. Sometimes you'll get to this and it won't factor any further and you'll get an imaginary solution or some such thing. So or a square root. Anyway, so you're gonna end up, you might need to use the quadratic formula. You might need to divide it all the way out. But let's start by just factoring, and a lot of these will just factor. So what we've got here is x times x is x squared. We want this to be positive, so these are the same, but we want them to add to be negative, so they're both negative. Oh, guess what? 7 times 2 is 14, and 7 plus 2 is 9. So we got off easy. So when we factor, this is our factored format, but the question is, what are the zeros? So remember, this is where you just set each of one of them equal to 0. And so when you subtract 1, -1 is a 0. Add 7, 7 is a 0. Add 2, 2 is a 0. So there's your 3 zeros for this function. All right? So the hardest part of that is just that you've got to guess and check, and that's not fun, but you can do it. All right? So first, you make a list of all the possible zeros, and then just pick one and just start trying them, and trying one after another until you hit on one that, oh yay, there's one that works. But you know what? Narrowing it down to here, at least you're not having to start with just any number. There's infinite number of numbers. You've narrowed it down to 1, 2, 4, 6, 8 numbers. It's a lot easier. All right, I think that's all I have for you today. Quick video. Your assignment is fairly short, but it is kind of tedious. So good luck. Talk to you soon.